Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who are joining us from all around the globe. Welcome to our Agri-Food Transition webinar. My name is Maria Alejandra Pulido, and I am the Sustainable Agri-Lead for Climate Bonds Initiative here in the EU. I am pleased to moderate today's webinar, and we will talk about investing for a sustainable future, global efforts toward deforestation-free supply chains. As always, we have brought together a stellar panel of experts for this conversation. And I am thrilled to welcome Rodrigo Lima, who is partner and director of AgriEcon. It is a Brazilian leading organization on key agriculture and renewable energy agendas related to trade, food system, and sustainable development. Roberto, you would like to say hello? Rodrigo, can you hear me? I think
Yeah. Thank you, Maria, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to join this very interesting debate. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Now, please welcome Reyes Hirado, who is the Agri-Food Senior Manager in Climate Bonds. She leads the development of the agri-food standards and oversees the delivery of the criteria that is focused on crop, livestock production, deforestation, and conversion-free sourcing, and food value chain. Reyes, it is a pleasure to see you here.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, everybody, for joining. It's going to be an exciting conversation, so I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you.
Let me now introduce you to Li Feng, who is the head of the China Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. Prior joining that organization, he was working as the Forest Program Manager at CDP China, leading its Sustainable Palm Oil project in addressing ESG disclosure and sustainable supply chain and green finance. Hi, Li Feng.
Hi, Maria. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for having me here, and say hello from Beijing. Yeah.
Last but not least, please welcome Duncan Bragg, who is independent policy analyst and advisor to Tropical Forest Alliance of the EU Working Policy Group. And he's also the associate of the Green Alliance and the facilitator of the Cocoa Coalition. Duncan works on issues including deforestation, agriculture, commodity supply chains, climate change, and environmental regulation and international trade. Duncan, it's great to see you here as well.
Thanks, Maria, and hello from a very cold but also quite sunny London.
Thank you. Now, before getting into the discussion, I would like to start with a couple of reflections that I think that is very important for today's conversation. Deforestation and forest degradation significantly contribute to the climate change and the biodiversity loss. We see how the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, reports that from the 1990 to the 2020, an area larger than the European Union, that is approximately 420 million hectares of forest, was lost to deforestation. And nearly 90% of the global deforestation was caused by agricultural expansion of crop and livestock production. We see how reducing deforestation is crucial to address a number of social and environmental crises, including the global threats of climate change and biodiversity loss. However, as over the 30% of all goods produced is treated within value chains that cross international borders, we see that traceability of origin is a challenge. Although deforestation and conversion of ecosystems mainly occurs during the production upstream in the supply chain, as well, the downstream firms and suppliers have a critical role to play in ensuring that the risk of deforestation is addressed within the commodity supply chain at source. And I think that this is what is the great interest of the EU regulation on deforestation-free products, EUDR. And today we're going to be talking about this regulation. Now, we have seen how countries such France and Norway have tried to combat important deforestation and how other initiatives focus more on illegal deforestation and limited commodities, as it is the case of the United States with the Forest Act, and as well the case of the UK recently introduced Environment Act in 2021. However, the EUDR is the one that marks that significant milestone in addressing deforestation associated with the supply chains. And as you already know, it covers some specific commodities that we are going to be talking about very soon with the speakers. Now, those commodities are going to be under the scope of the regulation with the legal and illegal deforestation focus. This has a wide-reaching benefits, including meeting the EU requirements for corporate sustainability and the Scope 3 reporting, and the upcoming requirements of the due diligence. But still, we can see that there are some challenges in terms of the information, and these raise different concerns in which ones will be those most cost-effective approach to meet the requirements while effectively reducing deforestation on the ground. And this is why I want to mention that Climate Bonds have published 2 papers where you can see all these analyses and the potential impacts and some recommendations that we are offering to corporates, financial institutions, and policymakers. And these papers are just a part of the ongoing series of tools that Climate Bonds is developing to tackle commodity-driven deforestation. The report is here on the QR code. I'm not sure if it will be yeah, I think it's this side. If you would like to get deeper into these recommendations and these analyses. And please consider as well that we have recently launched the public consultation for the investment criteria for deforestation and conversion-free sourcing commodities. You will find the link at the chat. Our team is going to be sharing it very, very soon. Now, these criteria will ensure that those entities that are best players sourcing without destroying the nature. So this will be providing confidence to the investors and the consumers that that certified entity produces DCF commodities. And I would like to close now this introduction, just highlighting how the EUDR is likely to have a far-reaching impact, not only here in the EU, but as well around the globe. And indeed, governments outside the EU will need to carefully consider the implications of the regulations and think about those steps that they would like to adopt in order to have agricultural trading policies and practices accordingly to the EUDR. But let's have this conversation together with the amazing panel that we have today, and let's get deeper into those global efforts, global deforestation-free supply chains. So before getting into the question, I just want to remind the audience that if you would like to share any comments, if you have any questions, if you would like to address any specific aspect, you have the chat here inside the room, and we will be happy to address them at the end of the panel. Now, to start the conversation, I would like to ask all the panelists, what do you think, and from your own perspective, which is that definition of deforestation and what is needed for a standard definition? Rodrigo, perhaps would you like to start?
Yes, thanks, Maria. I think we have the FAO concept of forests. That is an international concept, right? Changing the concept, you need to combine knowledge from different perspectives. Personally, I think the FAO concept is pretty good, which I think is the most challenging thing here for the whole debate of deforestation-free supply chains, is the inclusion of deforestation and conversion of different types of native vegetation that will not be at the scope of the concept of forest from the FAO. In the case of Brazil, for example, we have the Cerrado biome, which is a savanna. We have different types of native vegetation in the savanna in Brazil. And in some types of native vegetation, they will not be at the scope of forests from the FAO concept, but it's native vegetation and it can be converted and maybe not be at the scope of the concept of a specific regulation, for example. From the EUDR, yes, but from the UK, not necessarily. What is being constructed in the US as a potential approach as well. So I think not necessarily changing the concept of forest, but how to embrace and to consider conversion of native vegetation in a more general view.
Thank you, Rodrigo.
Can I come in?
Duncan. Yes,
yeah,
please.
I agree with Rodrigo. I mean, the EUDR uses the FAO definition of forest. which is land spanning more than 0.5 hectares with trees higher than 5 meters and a canopy cover of more than 10%. And obviously, if there are international definitions, you want to base regulation on that. It would be counterproductive to come up with a sort of different definition. But Rodrigo's also right to point to the danger of just focusing on forest and displacing commodity production and conversion to other lands that don't qualify as forest. And indeed, the regulation itself contains a series of reviews of various aspects of it. The 1-year review includes assessing whether the regulation should be extended to other wooded land, the FAO definition, which is of slightly less forest cover, and the 2-year review is about whether it should be extended to other natural ecosystems. And I think when the regulation was published, the Commission was pretty sympathetic to that. I think they indicated they'd just run out of time to work out how to extend it to other natural ecosystems, because it's a more difficult area there, and there are fewer international definitions. But I think that is absolutely the direction of travel, and that's the right one.
Thank you, Duncan. Regis, please.
Yes, so I'm agreeing with Rodrigo and with Duncan. Just wanted to bring in actually the need and the aspiration of having definitions that are more harmonized globally, and that we can all agree in terms of what we're talking about when we're talking about deforestation in this case. And I think in the FAO definition is clear. We can endorse it and go with it, work with it, even if there are aspects that might be improved, but there is a working definition that globally is applicable. The same with the EUDR. It doesn't mean that it is the best and that it wouldn't be improved, but it's the one that it can be implemented at the moment. It has behind a lot of policy discussions, a lot of debates across different sectors and regions, and it's something where we can start to work on. I say this because, there's a lot of debates and controversies about this definition, that definition. I think the need here is the definitions are not by principle, they're not based on opinions, they're based on consensus and on things that are workable across different sectors. And in that sense, going from the deforestation is totally needed. This is also why in the criteria that we have been developing in climate bonds, we are using a concept that is wider than deforestation only, deforestation and conversion-free sourcing. The conversion part is where we talk about the change of any natural ecosystem into agricultural land. So it is designed in this way so that, as Duncan was saying, gradually other policies will also embrace this need to include different ecosystems beyond forest. And this DCF, so deforestation and conversion-free sourcing, is based on consensus. It's based on the work on the Accountability Framework Initiative that put together many actors in the sector to actually come up with definitions that we can all work on, knowing that they can be improved, but there's the harmony we want to bring into the sector, so that when entities, when policy, when NGOs are talking about different concepts, we can all agree what is the direction of travel.
Thank you, Regis. Li-Feng?
Yes, I totally agree with all the speakers. I think the FAO one is the most common one. I think that's not important. I think for technical point, if we want to develop a standardized definition of deforestation globally, I think several facts we do need to consider, like the land use change, tree cover loss, degradation, and some like temporary changes. And even though like in different countries, maybe we have different understanding of what's the meaning of forest. So we need to consider the difference by the countries, and also I believe this is kind of like a technical issue. So most important thing from my side, I believe, is we definitely need to have the common sense, like the same understanding that forest is important. We definitely need to understand and address the issue of deforestation. What's the implication and the impacts on the environment and social issues? I think if we have the common sense, then we can work together and to define like a well-accepted definition of deforestation. Yeah. That's my comment.
Thank you all. I was mentioning at the beginning that several countries have come up with different approaches in terms of tracking deforestation, and considering that each one of you comes from a different country and region, I would like to ask you if you can share with the audience today, which ones are those efforts? Duncan, I see that you are already brainstorming.
So I could comment on the UK. So the UK has is introducing legislation to along the same lines as the EUDR, but different in that it only has, so the EU deforestation regulation has two underlying criteria which operators must meet to be able to place commodities on the market. The commodities have to be produced without deforestation from the end of 2020, and they have to be produced legally in accordance with the laws of the producing country. The UK legislation is only the latter criterion, the legality one. There isn't a zero deforestation one. And also they haven't yet defined which commodities they will be covering. I mean, they will eventually be the same ones as the EU, but probably not all at once. Personally, I think this is totally pointless. I think, you know, most of these forest risk commodities that enter the UK come through the EU in any case. So I think it's highly unlikely that anybody will be trading commodities that meet the UK criteria and not the EU criteria. So I think we ought to just mirror the EU legislation in this case. And the other thing the UK is doing, to be slightly more positive about it, is the UK is a major donor of development aid for forests and for climate finance in general. And I think that's a really important part of the story here. You can't ever rely on just single pieces of demand-side legislation like the EUDR or the UK legislation. You need to accompany it with a whole range of other measures, and support for producer countries in tackling the problems on the ground is a really important part of it. And I think the UK actually has quite a good, and to be fair, the EU as well, actually have quite a reasonable record on both of those things.
Thank you.
Maria,
Thank you,
if I may get what Duncan just brought, I think it's extremely important. The cooperation that countries must have in place when it comes to achieving such a goal like free deforestation and conversion-free supply chains. Because if we look the EUDR model, then we get the UK model, then the US model, then other countries' models, and some are DCF approach, some are deforestation-free approach, some are deforestation zero, no matter if there's legal deforestation, as the case of Brazil, because the forest code regulation and so on. Then we get to different models of regulations requiring operators to enroll and to bring information and data and so on. And this ultimately creates a huge complex matrix of approaches that some are common, some are different, trying to get to the same goal. And what might happen, in my view, and I will bring livestock as a critical example, in Brazil and I think most of the developing countries, the production of cattle start with small production, small producers, ranchers, right, that will produce the animals and then sell to those that will feed the animals and fat the animals to the level that goes to the meat packers. And the small producers, if they don't have support to improve, support to manage pasture, to recover degraded land and so on, they will ultimately be excluded from the supply chain. And the problem will continue there, right? Because one thing is how much beef Brazil exports to the EU, that is this size compared to the world. And ultimately, we will create an exclusion because those policies. And the problem at a broader view will continue to exist. So in my view, as Duncan pointed, cooperation is extremely needed, because otherwise we will, as society, as different countries, will not get to the main goal, right? the most important goal, that is to achieve deforestation-free commodities and allow those that are not following regulations and so on, that are illegally cutting forests, they will continue to do this and to sell their products to other companies in the internal market and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. I just only think who would like to jump into this point.
Lifen, go ahead.
Felipe.
Yeah, he was
Okay.
already touching the mic.
Sorry. Yeah, for just the same thing from the China perspective. I think, for most of the soft commodities like palm oil, soybean, and beef, I think China is the biggest, one of the biggest. Some commodities the biggest, and palm oil not the biggest, but definitely it's one of the biggest like importer of these commodities. We do, like from the consumer side, we do need to. I think right now in China we do need to understand the relevance, like. We do import quite a lot of amount of these products. What's the relevance what's the risk for the producing countries? And I think that's the key thing. Like let the senior management team in the company understand this issue is for the long term, like perspective, like for their business long-term strategy, you need to consider embed this like a topic into their decision making. That's very important. Then I think they need to understand what's the risks, what's their products is coming from, like the EUDR request. Okay, please report all the information, the data, what's the product, where it's sourced. Then based on this data, then you can understand the risk. Yeah. Assess risk, and then make the decision how we can set up the policies, commitments, targets, and engage with the suppliers. Then we need to cooperate with the producer countries and the suppliers in the supply chain. So I think I believe it should be like a stepwise like approach, one step by step. Then we can like not only promote this sustainable sourcing in the consumer country, but also support the sustainable production in the producing countries. Yeah, that's
Thank you, Life.
From my side for now. Yeah.
Yeah, all very interesting perspective, and I just wanted to maybe, and I kind of agree with many of what have been said. You ask us to talk from our perspective. So I'm based in Spain, but that's not my perspective. My perspective would be climate bonds. And I guess why, responding to the question of why, when we have been developing the standard, the criteria for deforestation and conversion-free sourcing, we have actually tried to mirror a lot of what was happening with the EUDR. Not because we think that the EUDR is the perfect example or policy, but because two reasons. One, because is a kind of more groundbreaking regional legislation, and the most ambitious was one that is going to come into effect very soon. And second, because as we've been discussing and touching on, the sector, the agri-food sector globally, really need common frameworks and common definitions and common objectives, if you like, on what can be, the objective that we all should be driving towards, right? So it's not really about the details of what the legislation is going to ask the entities and how is geolocation going to look like and so on and so forth. But it is really about the bigger pieces of principles that are behind the legislation. And I'll just say in very simple terms so that everybody can understand what is the EUDR really about. So the EUDR is really about stopping deforestation as soon as possible, and then setting a date for that. Duncan said, is a land that has been deforested after end of 2020 is considered to be deforestation. Forest. So forest, we're leaving out the other ecosystem. So already there's a weakness there. We are trying to cover that weakness in our criteria and climate bonds, including natural ecosystem. But basically it's saying no deforestation and no since that date, which it's kind of generous because many companies were actually making commitments to stop deforestation by 2010, then by 2020, and so on. So we really need to put a date and actually be strict on that. Otherwise, we know what's happening. The third, is deforestation, so forest protection by a date. The third thing is, what do you need to prove this? And to prove this, the sector as a whole and a lot of the civil society organizations have said, okay, we need transparency. We need to know what's happening where, and we need to know where these lands are being converted. And for that, the specific requirement is geolocation. For high-risk regions, entities really need to show what is the plot of land, where is the plot of land that you're using to grow the soy, the beef, the cocoa, the coffee, that you're saying is deforestation-free. So that then this information is available for the ones that is responsible for making sure that, is verified and is true. They can really say, okay, we're not only trusting your pledges and your commitments and your promises, we're actually able to see what's going on in these places. And basically, that is the EUDR. So it's not about being the perfect one. Of course, there's many things it could be improved. It's around setting some clear standards and guidelines that then the sector as a whole can start to work on. It's about, and of course, as you said, Rodrigo, I totally agree. They would need to work with the producers. So the producers are not really part of this. The producers should not bear the cost of having to do the geolocation data. It is the responsibility of those further in the supply chain who are, in a way also making more profit out of this trading, to really put in place and from the policymakers, to put in place the necessary incentives, if you like, or support, so that could be implemented in the ground without causing much problems. But I would defend that we really need this very strict goalpost to start moving in that direction and to really ensure that, the sector is going to be deforestation-free in the short term. And also, people say, okay, EU market. EU market is about, sorry, I'm going on too much, no?
Okay. Yes, you are covering what we're going to be discussing with the next question.
Sorry, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Regis, no worries. I think that it would be great if we connect this question with the following one, which is more focused on the behavior that the market is having all around the globe. A couple of you already mentioned that policies and regulations such as the EUDR can have an impact of those producers, operators that might choose a different market to allocate those products. So I would like to ask you, what do you think that would be that behavior of the market with the introduction of policies such as the EUDR? Duncan, would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the real danger, of course. Ideally, you want a global system, clearly, where all the major importing countries are applying the same criteria. It depends. It'll be interesting to see what happens. The danger is then that we end up with a situation where the commodities that are produced legally and without deforestation end up being exported to the EU, and all the commodities that are produced illegally or with deforestation end up getting exported to China or India or Japan or the other major consumer markets. So I think along with putting in place effective frameworks of cooperation with producer countries, it would be really good to see a lot more effort put into trying to get a more common approach to amongst consumer and importer countries. And it's interesting that we see some of this itself coming from producer countries in the shape of what's called the Broader Market Recognition Coalition, which kind of comes out of the EU's Forest Law Enforcement Governance and Trade Initiative, which goes back 20 years now, aimed at doing the same kind of thing we're talking about, but just with regard to timber and to exclude illegally logged timber from the market. I think it was a good initiative, actually, and it had a range of components. It had something like the deforestation regulation in the form of the timber regulation, and it had a partnership framework in the form of voluntary partnership agreements. The EU has kind of moved away from that model because it's been really slow and resource intensive to put in place the legality assurance and the licensing systems that the partnership agreements require. But some of them have been and are being put in place. And the countries that have done that, including particularly Indonesia and Ghana, Guyana, and a few others, have wanted to see greater recognition for their efforts in cleaning up their timber supply chains amongst consumer countries. So they're trying to start this broader market recognition coalition where they will say, set a list, a number of criteria, which will say any country can say that our products meet those criteria, they're legal, they're produced without deforestation, whatever the criteria are. That'll be independently validated, and then anybody consuming or importing those products will have some reliability on that. And that's a really good effort, I think, to try and establish the basis of a global system. But what we really need here is better cooperation between consumer countries to avoid the danger where it's just the good products that go to Europe and the bad products go everywhere else.
Thank you, Duncan.
I really like Duncan's views on the whole topics, and I would add, Maria, that if you talk to different operators, different companies here in Brazil that are at the scope of the first phase of the EUDR, what they will tell you, at least most of them, is that we will manage because we need to continue to export. We don't want to lose Europe, right? And it's very interesting to see some positions here sometimes that okay, we will not export to Europe, we will export to China or other country. But come on, Europe represents 16% of Brazilian exports of agriculture. This is our second market after China. So we are willing to lose Europe. Coffee, if coffee loses Europe, coffee exports 50% of Brazilian exports of coffee goes to Europe. We are really just simply saying, okay, I will find another market. This is not that easy, not just because, not just for Brazil, but I think for every country, from the demand side, from the supply side, right? It's not easy to find different places to buy some products in some moments. So everyone, the companies will try to and they are doing this. They are preparing, and today actually the European Union released the pilot, the information system pilot testing that will run this year to allow the operators to move and to prepare and so on. And I think we need to have in mind that the challenge to trace any type of information, and in this case is deforestation, the information we want to trace and to move from the field to the fork ultimately changes from what supply chain we're talking about, from the whole logistics of the different supply chains, because coffee, it's completely different from soybean and from livestock. And I have different challenges to trace a coffee bean from a Minas Gerais state producer to Italy, for example, from soybean, that the logistics of soybean from here to here is completely different, right? So I think the challenge on the logistics of the different supply chains must not be forgotten, because otherwise we will end up with different costs that will probably create cost to the final product. Because so I think everyone agrees that with the challenge, but how to get there, and then again cooperation between countries. And Brazil is starting, the Ministry of Agriculture creating a potential system for traceability and so on. It's not already done, but there are things going on here in Brazil from the government side, and for sure with the different companies in the private sector as well.
Thank you, Rodrigo. We're going to be able to get deeper into that with the following questions. Lifeng, yes.
Yeah, just quick add, like echo, just mentioned about the demand side and supply side. Actually, it's very difficult to like consume whether all the products come to China, whether we can consume it, definitely not. And second echo is about the logistics. Yes, it's kind of like a business issue. If you have already built up a very like a strong relationship or contract or infrastructure is already built there, if you want to change, it's definitely will change, like increase the cost for the like the shortage, transfer, and management of the products. All of this is the complex of the supply chain. You will increase the cost. Yeah, just a quick echo what you just mentioned. But what I want to add is, although I think from China, actually, although we have not like issued a specific like importing soft commodity like sustainability laws, regulations yet, but yeah, we do see some of our friends and partners always like, or even some producer companies saying, okay, Chinese company are not care about the sustainability, but actually the fact is not. Actually, from our like observation and from palm oil sector, what we have been observed is like now we have seen quite lots of the top brands in China like coming with ISPO. And they have already set a very strong commitment and policy targets. They want to increase the uptake of ISPO certified palm oil in the region. So, and also they have already communicated with like external stakeholders. So I think that's very important. I want to take this opportunity, like kind of like send out the signal again. Yes, Chinese company are care about, and the market is care about sustainability, and we definitely want to step by step to increase the responsible sourcing and also potentially cooperate with the producer countries. Yeah.
Thank you, Li-Feng. Reyes.
So just very briefly, I wanted to bring in a different perspective. No, so yes, the EU market, the impact on deforestation is quite big. It's not small. It's the second in the world after China. So China is about 24%. The EU is 16%. And of course, this is a problem and it's difficult and it's complex and all of that we have talked about, and I agree. But I guess the new perspective is that I see it's also an opportunity. It's also an incentive. It can also mean growth opportunities for many entities. This is a bit the approach that we take in climate bonds also, in driving these criteria so that the best players, the ones that are already moving, the ones that are able to certify that they are deforestation and conversion free, they can have financial incentives. So it's not all about the sanctions. It's not all about the stick. It's also about the carrot. It's also about the incentives that those can take from actually this legislation that is going to start, and it has an effect on the policy, the sanctions, and so on, but take that to the next level of what can mean for business, what can mean in terms of the incentives that can come also from the financial sector in this case. I will leave it there.
Thank you, Reyes. We're going to get deep into the role that financial institutions have here in this context of tackling deforestation-free supply chains. We're going to be talking about this very soon. But before that, I would like to come up with some of the questions that we're receiving from the audience, who is very active. Thank you so much for that. This question, I think that it will be more for you, Duncan, as it is related to the policy side and trade conflict. We have one question, and it is about what is the conflict that we can have between those countries that have their own regulation in terms of what is legal and illegal deforestation? How we can dictate which policy will have priority or will be more important in a scale of values, and how we can tackle that kind of conflict?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's at the root of the difference between the EU's and the UK's approach. Where the UK just focuses on legality, whereas the EU adds the zero deforestation criterion as well. I mean, I think the question says, should the EU dictate other countries' national laws? Obviously not. But on the other hand, the EU does have the right to determine what products it will allow through into its market. So if it says it wants deforestation commodities, that's an issue of national sovereignty just as much as the producer country setting its own laws. And I think that's reasonable. The reason why the EU added that criterion for the deforestation regulation, I think, is from experience with the timber regulation and the FLEGT action plan, which was entirely aimed at illegal logging. And while it had good impacts in many countries, it still didn't stop legal deforestation and legal forest loss. And we have seen legal forest loss being just as much a problem, particularly for clearance for agriculture, in fact, probably more of a problem than illegal logging. So if we're concerned about deforestation on a global scale, if we're concerned about climate change, the nature and climate emergencies, we have to tackle deforestation overall without worrying about whether it's legal or illegal. It makes, and the other reason for doing it actually is because it is not often very easy to prove whether something has been produced legally or illegally at the point of import or the point of placing on the European market. And cooperation with enforcement authorities in the countries of origin is not always very good. There have been many instances of corruption and lack of capacity and so on. Whereas you can tell, at least in principle, you can tell through things like satellite imaging, satellite monitoring, independently available sources of information, whether something has been sourced from a deforested area, as long as you have the traceability mechanism in place. So in many ways, and we've seen, again, experience with the timber regulation, enforcement authorities in the EU have increasingly tried to rely on scientific methods, not just satellite monitoring, but DNA testing, isotopic testing, and so on, to try and determine the origin of the product. And in some ways, that is less problematic than trying to evaluate the legality of the product. So I think it is for two reasons then, the principal reason addressing deforestation and the practical reason that it's difficult to determine illegality. I think there are good arguments for the EUDR's approach.
Thank you, Duncan. Regis, I would like to ask you a technical question. Can you explain to us where is the difference or what are the similarities between forest degradation and deforestation? Do we talk about the same thing?
Yes, so in the EUDR and in some of the, for example, Accountability Framework Initiative guidance, forest degradation is included in deforestation. So when we talk about how a natural forest is degraded to a level that cannot be considered for a natural forest anymore. So even maybe it's not an agriculture field, but it's not longer a forest, that's considered deforestation. So in a way, it is included, and that's why it is not spelled out differently. It doesn't say deforestation and degradation because many forms of degradation are included in deforestation. Now, there's also other forms of degradation and also degradation of natural ecosystem, which are not included there. And they should. So there's a scope for strengthening and making it, broader, covering other cases. But it's a good starting point because it covers some of those instances of degradation by considering them deforestation.
Thank you. We have this question from the audience. We think you were mentioning before how producers need to collaborate with their suppliers and how it should come up this kind of synergy among the different actors of the supply chain. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, how exactly will producers need to collaborate with those suppliers, invest in new technologies, and adopt sustainable practices? And perhaps if you can give us an example from the palm oil industry, that would be great.
Yes, for sure. Just to double check, the producers, which means it's not like producer in the field, yeah? From the China perspective, maybe the manufacturers, right? Can I just double check with your question? Yeah.
Yes. It's more about from your point of view and considering that you work with the palm oil industry, how this collaboration is taking place between all those actors that are part of the supply chain.
Okay. Yeah, I think I just want to bring one story or the case. What is like what's now happening in China? Actually, our team in China is like supporting our members or cooperating with our members on this issue. I'm afraid I cannot name what's the exact name of the member, but they are it's a top, like global top, like multinational brands. And actually, they have already set 100% ISPO certified palm oil target by 2025. And also they have set specific targets, like which model they will use, like MBSG or even IP for their different product portfolios. So now they have already progressed very well in their headquarter country and other markets. So what they want to do is they want to implement this target and policy in China. So what do we support them, and how we work together? So the first thing is we have an internal like capacity building for the procurement team in China, and to increase the awareness for them internally to understand what's the relevance of the issue, like why palm oil is relevant for with deforestation, and what's the implications for the environment and the social in producing countries. So they need to understand what does that mean. Otherwise, they will, okay, what's relevant? I will not choose to do. So that's the first thing what we have been done, and we have a training with their internal team. And secondly, we will help them to mapping out their supplier who are using palm oil and palm oil ingredients in their products. It's a very challenging work because they don't know it, because palm oil is used everywhere, like half of the like products in the supermarkets. So like dozens and hundreds of the products, and dozens, hundreds of the suppliers in our mapping list, and we just single out which is the top one, like tier 1 suppliers, second tier suppliers. And the suggestions is we need to focus on the like strategic supplier first, and then engage with the suppliers to give them a training. Let the supplier understand what we are doing, what's the multinational brands are doing in China, what's the ask for them. Let them understand their policy and let them buy in. So we just give the supply training for 2 rounds of training again. And in total, we have 3 rounds of training for the company, for the brand procurement team, and also their suppliers. And then we will work with the suppliers, like to tell them for palm oil how to be with ISPO, how to conduct the certification, and also how to increase the uptake. And together with the brands, and we can achieve their global policy, and with the efforts from China. So that's the case, what we are doing now in China. And we hope there's more like brands will like conduct such kinds of like behavior practice. And I think will be the key driver to transform the market here. Yeah.
Thank you, Lifeng. I think that each industry, of course, it's different, but what you are sharing today is an example of best practices. So I hope that many here in the audience can take this as an example of how to proceed. And Rodrigo, one question for you, and this is coming as well from the audience. In the context of the EUDR in Brazil, do you think that there will be a cooperation, a way to work together between the government and companies to build one unique methodology to demonstrate that products are deforestation-free? Or do you think that each company will build its own methodology?
Yeah, this is a challenging question. As I said, companies are building their strategies because they want to continue exporting, right? And they will need to have a kind of information to pass to the importer, because otherwise it might be a disruption. But the Ministry of Agriculture is working on a traceability system. It's not ready, but there are movements going on, especially when it comes to livestock, because livestock, the animals move around and so on, and it's a totally peculiar supply chain, right? And challenging because the small ranchers and so on, and so there's this effort from the Ministry of Agriculture as well. But I think one important thing in Brazil to quote is that because we have the forest code, there is a very important regulation affecting rural areas, by producers must have and conserve native vegetation, changing from the biomes, the quantity of area you must conserve to be able to use the other area. there's the Rural Environmental Registry, we call CAR. And the CAR are starting to be validated. There was a huge gap of CAR validation in the past years, but now things are starting to move forward. And I am a producer, I do my CAR, my registry, the state validates, it passes a very good information along the chain that my area, it's there, I'm following the regulation, or I'm in the process to follow, to comply with to restore native vegetation, for example. And the CAR, it's a legal instrument and can bring a very good information along the chain, right? Of course, the situation can change because now I have a CAR validated showing that I'm not deforesting, that I'm following the regulation. But from 6 years, now I can cut down 10 hectares, for example. And the CAR should be updated and pass the information that will be negative in this example. So the CAR will be an important tool as well. But again, there's not such one silver bullet that will help everyone to really have positive information. And in my mind, the importer doesn't suffer a fine and have problems within the EU. So what types of information the importer will accept, because otherwise the Commission can't put a fine and the importer doesn't want, and the exporter doesn't want to lose the importer as well. So I think, again, cooperation is extremely important, but I see that we will face different approaches and tools and ways to follow this DCF supply chains.
Can I come in on this? Because in fact, we discussed
Yes,
exactly this issue in the Cocoa Coalition meeting yesterday. And incidentally, for people who don't know, Cocoa Coalition is a kind of informal grouping of cocoa and chocolate companies, certification organizations, and NGOs operating primarily within the EU. The problem is that the liability for non-compliance with the regulation rests with the operator, the company that puts the products on the market. So there are national traceability systems for cocoa being put in place in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, the two main cocoa producing countries. But at the moment, there's quite a lot of skepticism about whether they're reliable enough, whether they will be in place and effective enough by the end of the year. And of course, if an operator puts cocoa on the European market and says, well, it was traced okay through the Ghanaian national system, and it's proven not to be, it won't be the Ghanaian government that suffers, it'll be the operator. So basically, all the companies are putting in place their own systems. I mean, largely they have them already, and they're just extending them, which is in a kind of, a bit of a waste of effort in a sense, because there's a lot of duplication of effort. I think where national traceability systems are in place and have been shown to be totally reliable, then I think we might see a shift. It'll be interesting to see how the enforcement authorities in the EU treat that kind of evidence. And I think if it can be shown that national traceability systems are reliable, I think they will, even though strictly speaking, the operators have liability, I think that will be something that competent authorities would look at and say, okay, yeah, just because of the sheer effort involved and the sheer volume of information they're going to have to look at, I think they will tend to treat good traceability systems as evidence of compliance, even if that's not strictly what the letter of the regulation says. But we'll have to see how this develops, over the next few years as the regulation comes into force.
Thank you, Duncan. I would like to raise this issue because we only have 5 minutes to go. And I know that this conversation is something that we can continue for many and many hours. But I would like to address 2 more questions that are very relevant before finishing and concluding this webinar. As you know, the EUDR recognizes the role of third-party verification and certification schemes as tools to demonstrate the due diligence and the compliance of the regulation requirements. I'm wondering, and perhaps Trajan can start giving us some light here, is how exactly those schemes and those certifications are important in order to deliver those results, and of course to have a positive impact for people, nature, and climate.
So I think as we have been touching on often, I guess operators and entities and different regions are gonna need as much support as possible from different players in the market in how to get to this regulation of the EUDR as soon as possible, or by the time that it comes in place at the end of this year. However, also a word of caution, and I think third-party certification could be very important. I will touch on this later, but as Duncan was saying before, at the end, this is a conversation between the EUDR and the enforcing of that regulation and the entities. So the entities, the operators, will have to have in place all the needed information and disclosure and so on, that to be able to prove that they can enter the market. So, but in preparing for this and being able to have all the due diligence systems in place and so on, is where different certification schemes and different frameworks and guidance can really be of help. Because this is, as you know, a lot of debate around it, but also complex in a way that, it could have been done in a more collaborative way, so that different producers from different regions and so on could have been more broad in line. Having said that, I feel like certification like and now I'm going to talk about my own work, allow me, the different criteria sets that climate bonds deliver want to be global, in the sense that they would apply to any jurisdiction in terms of legality, but they want to support those best players in the market that want to move ahead of the game to be ready with the systems they need in place. So this is why we are mirroring in the criteria a lot of the requirements that the EUDR will have, but also others, and the certification process can help support these changes within their own entity systems that will need to be in place by, if they want to get into the EU market, by the end of the year. So this is where, it's kind of many different actors, roundtable on sustainable palm oil could be, the criteria that we are developing and many others can serve as kind of testing pilots and assistant tools to get to the regulation in time. So this is where, we're very open to working also with entities that want to do case studies to see how far the systems that they already have will take them there, and what could be the needed additional efforts that they need to make.
Just to be...
Thank you, Regis.
Just
Yes,
to
and it has to be very fast. I'm sorry, because we only have 1 minute left. So I'm sorry.
But just to be accurate, the EUDR doesn't actually recognize certification systems. The only reference is in the risk mitigation process, where if an operator finds there's a high risk of non-compliance, you can use evidence from certification systems. That's one of the things you can do to try and mitigate that risk. But you can't say we're importing RSPO certified palm oil, say, and that therefore meets the requirements of the regulation, because it won't. I think personally there ought to be a bigger role for certification systems, and I think in practice there probably will be. And we saw that in the timber regulation, but again, we'll have to see how this plays out.
Thank you, Duncan. Now, I know that we have more questions from the audience. We wanted to touch as well about the expansion of the target that the regulation has currently to financial institutions, as they are not currently part of it. But we are not able to get deep into that. However, I would like to invite everyone in the audience to get inside the papers that we have and the different tools that we are sharing at our website, and you will be able to have a deep dive into all these aspects. And of course, if you would like to continue the conversation with all the speakers, just feel free to reach out to them and have these one-to-one discussions, because I know that they will be open to that. So I would like to thank Lefang, Regis, and Duncan, and as well Rodrigo, for this amazing conversation. It was great to hear about your opinions and how you shared your knowledge and your own perspective of what is going on in terms of deforestation around the globe and the different challenges and opportunities that we are looking forward. I would like to thank each of you in the audience as well for taking your time of being part of this webinar and learning together with us. So just to remind you, check out the EUDR reports, participate at the DCF sourcing criteria public consultation, and let's continue this conversation. So thank you so much for listening and take care. Bye-bye.